Welcome to today's Energy Central Power session entitled Harnessing VPPs, Full Potential, Operational Challenges and Best Practices. Before we begin, I would like to certainly thank Virtual Peaker for making today's event possible. We appreciate their sponsorship. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to our moderator, Mike Smith, to kick things off. Mike, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Thanks, PJ, and welcome everybody for joining us today. We've got a great session put together, and I've actually learned quite a bit about virtual power plants in the run-up to today's session with all the prep we've been doing with today's speakers. So I'm going to share just a few thoughts to kind of frame the issue as we move forward. Then we're going to dive into the content. And for those of you who have attended some of our power sessions in the past, this one's a little different, where our speakers have some really good stuff to share before we dive into the open discussion. As PJ said, we do encourage you to use the chat to ask questions. We will do our best to incorporate those into the discussion. So we'll watch for that, and hopefully you'll have some questions and we'll be able to answer them and have a richer discussion. In the spirit of moving forward, PJ, next slide, please. And I'm going to just share a few thoughts about what we're seeing in the virtual power plant space. I wanted to start with kind of a level set here where we're just looking at a generally accepted definition of what virtual power plants are, and this is from the Department of Energy. So I think this is something most can agree on. I boldface that function as a single dispatchable power source. I think that is something that really is, if you will, the secret sauce that makes virtual power plants such a valuable piece of the energy mix as we move deeper into the energy transition. So just keep that little data bit in mind as we move forward when you think about the value of moving forward with VPPs. Next slide, please. And of course, the VPP market is growing globally. I think this speaks to the value that utility leaders are seeing, particularly in terms of when they look at their energy mix, maybe some of their clean energy or renewable energy goals. They need to have these different resources available. Virtual power plants is one that is becoming more and more a part of many different utilities' strategies as they move deeper into the energy transition. And as we'll see, it's something that works technically, is economically feasible, and is able to ramp up pretty quickly, which is important during different types of events at the utility. Next slide, please. I did want to just share a few thoughts that we found doing some of the research leading into this. And these three seem to capture a lot of what we think the value proposition is as utilities look at virtual power plants, again, as part of that resource mix. That first quote from the DOE, yeah, it acts like a power plant, and that's a critical differentiator to some of the other things that are out there on that energy landscape. The second quote there is from Energized Capital, and this is also important because, hey, it's not only really good technically, but it's an economically imperative and viable piece of that energy puzzle. So that's something that should get a lot of folks looking at this a little more seriously. And then, of course, that last quote also from the DOE is where when you're looking at a technical implementation in the utility space, we've all seen these can run long, they can go over budget, there's a lot of technical issues, there's business process issues. I don't think we have a lot of that in the VPP space, but there are challenges. But ultimately, as per the DOE here, it's well worth that cascade of benefits. So those are just a few thoughts as we dive into today's session, and I am going to introduce our speakers and panelists. So what I would like to do is I'll introduce both of our speakers who are here with us today, and then I will proceed to hand it off. They're going to have some of their own opening remarks, and they have some great case study and just technology information to share with you today, and we're going to dive into the discussion. So our first presenter will be Ben Brosnan. Ben is the Director of Solutions Engineering at Virtual Peaker. He earned his electrical engineering degree from the University of Kentucky and an MBA from the University of Denver. Ben has 10 years of experience in the energy industry, where he's worked at places like Schneider Electric and Uplight before joining Virtual Peaker. Ben works with clients to identify their overall needs and system requirements, and has acted as a bridge between sales and product teams. That means Ben has to speak both sales and product, not an easy landscape to navigate. While at Schneider, he worked with many utilities to upgrade and modernize their medium and low voltage electrical systems. At Virtual Peaker, Ben and his team are focused on educating utilities on the software functionality, how it can meet their terms, goals, and needs. solution and proposal development, device partner management, which we'll see is a big part of how this all works, and helping to develop sales and product strategy. Our second speaker is going to be Kimball LaRouche, who is the DER specialist at Holy Cross Energy in Colorado. His goal there is to employ the use of more solar and battery storage on their grid in a manner that benefits the entire membership. Alongside managing the Power Plus and Power Plus Flex programs at Holy Cross. Those are their two residential programs that we're going to hear more about on a day-to-day basis. Kimball also is researching new grid technologies, member-facing program concepts, and other methods, that have the potential to drive Holy Cross Energy towards its renewable energy goals. Kimball then integrates these findings along with other findings from other Holy Cross specialists into actionable programs and projects. Prior to joining Holy Cross, Kimball worked in the solar and battery storage industry throughout the Holy Cross territory and beyond in the solar industry. So that's our speakers for today. They're going to share some of what they've been working on, and then we're going to dive into a discussion. And again, I'll encourage you to put questions into the chat. We're monitoring that, and where we can incorporate that into the discussion, we certainly will. So PJ, if you want to move to the next slide, we'll give the floor to Ben.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So this is a presentation I and Kimberly put together about a month ago, covering the operational challenges and best practices of virtual power plants. I'm going to cover some just high-level general challenges and insights we found working with a bunch of different utilities. And then Kimberly's going to really deep dive their battery program at Holy Cross Energy. And then, so for those maybe not familiar with Virtual Peaker is a virtual power plant software provider that supports over 40 utilities across the United States and Canada. With all these different utilities, they each come with their unique set of challenges and goals that they're trying to accomplish. Kimberly's going to really deep dive some of the challenges they face being up in the Rocky Mountain region. Those are much different than some of the utilities we work with in Texas, Florida, the Northeast, and in California. So along with working with over 40 utilities, on the next slide, please. We also work with over 35 different device partners that integrate into Virtual Peaker to give utilities as much option and flexibility to provide their customers the ability to enroll in these virtual power plant programs, gain as much market share as they can with all these various manufacturers and device types that are out there. And then with all these manufacturers, they come with their unique set of parameters or limitations, as well as each device type works a little bit and operates a little bit differently based on how you want to run your virtual power plant. So the combination of all those utilities and device partners on the next slide, we've kind of gained some general challenges and insights we've seen over the past 10 years. Probably the number one challenge we've seen working with utilities on really building out a true virtual power plant is the scalability of programs based on both the overall software and then the devices available. So what we've seen is software might not have as much functionality that's needed, might only have access to limited device types or limited feature sets, and there might not be as many device partners eligible through that software to give the utility as much access as possible to scale those virtual power plant programs, to get as many customers enrolled as possible, as many devices available for control. So some ways we've mitigated those challenges is by really focusing on device partner management. Like I said, we already integrate with 35 of them. We're constantly adding more. It's a big focus on what we do internally to give utilities as much optionality as possible when they're launching virtual power plant programs, as well as focusing on continuous software development based on customer feedback to add new features, build out existing feature sets to give as much flexibility as possible on how you can control these devices. And then on the utility side, what we've seen where programs have been really successful is having really dedicated utility resources to manage these programs day to day, both from a customer standpoint, which I'll get into a little bit into the next challenge, and then just in a everyday control standpoint, reporting standpoint to ensure the virtual power plants are delivering the value the utility is expecting. And then the next major challenge we have seen with VPPs is the customer engagement, enrollment, and participation. Because you are bringing together thousands, tens of thousands of devices to aggregate up into a virtual power plant, it does require a lot of customer engagement to drive enrollments and drive participations. So some things we've done on our side to help improve that experience is developing easy enrollment flows so customers can quickly get into programs. And what we've seen be successful from a utility standpoint is ongoing marketing, in particular utility branded marketing. Some of the manufacturers do their own marketing, but we found with utility clients that do really specific targeted marketing using their branding and messaging, it helps drive enrollment into their own programs. And then also having really strong incentive structures to help drive more enrollments year over year. I know Kimber will go a little bit more on how their battery incentive is structured, but if you're able to budget out a really strong incentive structure, it definitely drives higher enrollment and then engagement over time as you keep running those VPPs, because you don't want people to just enroll, get that first incentive, and then not actually participate. And then the last major challenge we've seen is device reliability and event participation. So when a utility wants to call on these devices, they need to know how many devices are online, how much load they should expect to get, and have an expected amount they should receive every time, whether it's thermostats, batteries, water heaters, whatever the device type is. Again, some things we've done to mitigate these challenges provide reporting that quickly shows online, offline device reporting for utilities so they know which devices are actually connected and ready for use, which customers and devices they need to reach out to get them back online into the program, as well as understanding event opt-outs to show how many people actually opt out per event. Are you potentially calling too many events? Are too many people opting out? You have to restructure that event so more people will participate. And then on the utility side, just ongoing messaging, whether it is for the event itself or just as whether it's a seasonal program or ongoing program, just keeping customers up to date of that program, that they're in it, when the expected events are supposed to happen, how the program works. The continuous education helps drive up the event participation. And then with all these different challenges, there's also some insights we've gained from the various device types and manufacturers we've worked with. So going to the next slide. Some of the trends we've seen across the various device types that we work with. So we work with 5 major device types right now: thermostats, water heaters, batteries, EV chargers, and then EVs themselves. They are all used in different ways to help support different use cases. Thermostats have been around the longest. Were kind of started the traditional demand response type of programs, generally used seasonally for peak load shifting, in particular for like a 1 or 2 hour event to help shift load out of those peak hours, whether it's an afternoon peak or morning peak, depending on the utility. I'd say thermostats at this point is pretty mature of how that technology works, how those programs work. Enrollments are generally pretty smooth. Most of those manufacturers support in-app enrollment, which makes it super easy from the customer. Though there's relatively limited control with thermostats. You can basically just adjust the set point by like a couple of degrees. There's not much more you can do with them. So it really limits hours of when you can control them. Compared to like water heaters, we've seen a couple utilities do daily load shifting to water heaters to shift that either early in the morning, late in the evening, outside of peak load. So the water will still remain hot for the customer, but for the utility, they're able to put a lot of that load at times when they have less load on their system. Though a big challenge with water heaters is there's a variance maturity across the manufacturers of how many actual connected water heaters are in a territory. Like every house has a water heater, but many of them aren't actually Wi-Fi connected. So there's a big gap in getting actually water heaters connected online and in programs. And then along with that, it makes the enrollment and overall customer experience a bit more difficult and challenging to actually build a program to scale. And then kind of the next device type here is batteries. Batteries probably offer the most control and flexibility for VPP. Probably are kind of a foundation of a VPP program. You can dispatch them really however you want throughout the day. You could charge them at times when peak is low, prices are low, discharge them during peak times or offset any coincident peak pricing. And you can really get complex in how that dispatch strategy works. I'd say overall, battery data is super reliable, offers a ton of control. The program design gets way more complicated in how you want to offer that. It could be like a direct install program where you're working directly with manufacturers to get batteries out into people's homes. You could also do a simple bring your own device program, though that might limit how many enrollments come in since there aren't that many batteries in the market today. And then lastly, EV chargers and EV telematics are similar-ish. EV chargers is actually controlling the charger at the home, where EV is controlling the car itself. But generally speaking, you can kind of shift that EV charging around to non-peak hours, or just tell them not to charge during peak hours to offset any extra load on the system. Some of the big differences with EV chargers and EV telematics. With EV chargers, super reliable data. You have various control strategies. You could also throttle charging, do some more complex control strategy there. Though one of the big limitations is the customer has to have a level 2 charger to be able to actually connect to the internet and do that managed charging. Where EV telematics is direct from the car, though it's a less mature technology. There's relatively limited control. And currently, the data is relatively inconsistent across OEMs. All the car manufacturers are trying to figure out what their EV managed charging strategy is. So you'll see vast differences between like Tesla, Ford, Toyota, and the various other EV manufacturers out there. And then lastly, going to my final slide, I just have some examples of typical results you will see for these different device types. One is an EV charger, EV telematics event, and one's a thermostat event. Kind of that dark blue or purple region here is when the event actually occurs. With EV chargers, EV telematics in these examples, I'm telling them not to charge at all. Again, with EV chargers, you could get more creative and throttle some charging to give people access to some charging to the car if you want to. And then with thermostats, it's pretty typical to kind of see this Nike swoosh type of result where the first hour or two, you'll see the highest results and load shift. And then eventually those HVAC units just have to kick on to maintain that new set point. But that's another example of how you can kind of shift some power out of those peak hours. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kimbrel to really deep dive Holy Cross's battery program and really go through how batteries are working for them.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. So I just want to start with this slide about Holy Cross Energy. We're a cooperative utility in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Our territory goes basically from Vail, Colorado to Aspen and then up towards Grand Junction, but not quite. So we have a very diverse member base, everything from low, moderate income all the way up to crazy high income in the Aspen ski resorts and Vail ski resort area. And we also serve, I think it's 7 or 9 ski resorts that have a fun combination of snowmaking and snow melting all at the same time, which contributes to our 250 megawatt peak demand. So we're about 45,000 members, 62,000 meters. I just think it's important to understand the utility a little bit at least before we dive into what virtual power plant format made sense for us. And then also our energy goals of 100% renewable energy by 2030, pretty lofty goal. But just a few months ago, we were at about 96% renewable for that month. I think that was April. And that should put us at the end of this year in the low 90s or high 80s. So we're still hoping we can make that 100% renewable energy by 2030. Next slide, please. So mostly how we're going to get there, that's what I want to talk about here, is a combination of incorporating utility scale and behind the meter energy storage assets and behavior programs. Our goal of 100% renewable has a part of that is the last 10% we plan to make up with behind the meter assets, DER programs, member facing programs in general. So your traditional demand response, but a huge part of that is going to be the residential battery programs that I'm going to talk about. Our economic use case for the virtual power plant comes from coincident peak demand reduction. We're on a coincident peak rate from our wholesale power provider. So basically what that means is that once 1 hour of every month, our wholesale provider is going to charge us a lot of energy for a lot of money for every megawatt we pull from their grid. And so essentially we're trying to predict the weather patterns and when their system is going to peak in the Denver metro area. We're trying to predict their system peak to determine when they're going to charge us a lot of money. And so that gives us the use case of we're dispatching our virtual power plant up to 10 times a month for 2 hours in every dispatch. That's the discharge. So we figure 10 times a month is going to give us the best possible outcome of hitting that one coincident peak hour, which we tend to center between our 2 hour discharge. And then further use cases will reveal themselves as we continue forward. Those use cases being centered more around safety and reliability. And we can incorporate feeder constraints and maybe even transformer level constraints, things like that. But for now, the biggest economic use case is coincident peak shaving. So moving on to the next slide.
And while we're moving to the next slide, I'll just jump in. We're getting a number of questions from the audience. I just want to let the audience know that I see them, and we're going to address those in just a couple of minutes. We're going to let Kimbrel get through his opening remarks. I think some of what he's saying is going to answer some of those questions, but I just want to let the audience know we do see them, and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. Go ahead, Kimbrel.
Thanks, Mike. So going back to our battery program, we started this endeavor in about 2018. That's when we started piloting with a few systems. We put 2 Tesla Powerwalls on one of our own employee housing buildings, and then growing that till now was, so that was Power Plus. And then in the beginning of 2025, we started phasing out Power Plus and migrating that to Power Plus Flex with a few key differences that I can go over. But the VPP we built with Power Plus consists of about 230 sites with an average of 20 kilowatts per site. The minimum was 10 kilowatts, the maximum was 25 kilowatts. And at the time, we were exclusively with Tesla Powerwall 2. So you might see that minimum and maximum number comes directly from the nameplate ratings of that battery, 5 kilowatts per battery. And that made the program economics very simple. But as more batteries joined the program, that kind of got increasingly complicated, and which is a challenge I want to go over a bit. But starting high level here, we were able to build nearly 5 megawatts, and we still have some in progress Power Plus jobs. And then in terms of performance, we're getting about 93% of the batteries when we call upon them. There's some uncertainty there when it comes to internet reliability. As you can imagine, up in the mountains in Colorado, there's also sometimes installation errors, electrical programming during commissioning that could get in the way of dispatch. So just something to be aware of. And now since we've started with Power Plus Flex, we've got 8 sites. We allow for the first time now for people to choose their enrollment value. Everyone has chosen 100% so far, and we've got a lot of interest. I do expect us to start increasing that 8 sites pretty exponentially here, because we rolled out Power Plus Flex in the beginning of the year, and in our service territory, lead times for batteries can be up to a year long. So there's a ton of interest. All those batteries are currently in the installation process, after which they'll enroll. And then in terms of performance, we only have 8 sites, so 99% capacity factor is really what I'd hope for with just 8 sites. Moving on to the next slide. These are some big program wins we've had over the year, about a megawatt growth rate per year, putting us at nearly 5 megawatts. Our service territory has a big challenge of it's hard to find good labor for our contractors, and we have a pretty small network of contractors in our service territory, mostly mom and pops. So I consider that 1 megawatt per year growth rate pretty good, especially when you consider our system size. It's nothing compared to what the IOUs in California might be able to put out, but It certainly saves us a lot of money, as we'll see. We've got 6 participating OEMs thanks to Virtual Peaker's vast network, and a few more on the way. It's pretty neat that we can just accept new OEMs as they integrate into Virtual Peaker. As I said, we started with Tesla, but now we're offering Emporia, Enphase, and a few more, namely Fortress is allowing us to get into the commercial sector. I'll go over that a bit more later. One of our biggest program wins is being able to drive down the cost of participation only to $15 a month for a system size of roughly 20 kilowatts. We were able to do that through the tax credits. Unfortunately, that was only a very brief period of time. The new administration made that tricky to continue to roll out, decided it was too much risk. But I can go over what exactly we were able to do to bring that participation down to 15 bucks a month. And then all in all, that nearly 5 megawatts of battery dispatch saves us $700,000 to $800,000 of power supply costs every year. And then we essentially take those savings and pass it on to the member in the form of bill credits and upfront rebates for participation in the program. The philosophy there is we'd rather pay our members than our wholesale power providers, simple as that. The pretty bold statement here, but I like to claim that it's the lowest cost to a residential energy storage ever. I challenge anyone to see if they can prove me wrong on that. But at $15 a month for 10 years, that's only 1,800 bucks out of pocket spread over 10 years. So moving on to the next slide, just want to talk about the power plant in practice, what that looks like. So this is a graph pulled directly from Virtual Peaker showing one of our battery dispatch events. So I mentioned we're discharging for 2 hours up to 10 times a month. Sometimes it's like 1 time a month, just depending on how confident we are that we hit the peak. And then sometimes we're using all 10 events. On average, about 6 to 8 events a month. We've broken down our events into 3 categories. A pre-event where we charge the batteries, make sure we get the value we're paying for. And then we discharge the batteries right after the charge command. The charge is in green, the discharge is in purple blue. And then we have a post-event command of just standby. That lasts 2 hours. The reason for the standby command is if we miss our coincident peak in our predictions, we definitely don't want batteries to be charging during that coincident peak. That would be very expensive. And as you can see by the thin blue line, the batteries do start to charge right after the post event. So we just want to make sure we're not charging during the peak. Moving on to the next slide. Something that not everyone talks about is battery degradation. We're starting to get to that point in our virtual power plant where we've had batteries for 5-6 years, and we do start to see degradation. We're discharging the batteries to roughly 26% state of charge, sometimes down to 20%. We never go below 20%, but when the battery's degraded a little bit, it runs out of kilowatt hours. And so what that looks like from a dispatch perspective is we hit that 20% floor a little sooner than we originally did 5 years ago. And so during the second hour of dispatch, it kind of trails off a bit, and we only get 1.5 to 1 hour and 45 minutes worth of the full capacity. So we, on average, see about a 1.46% annual degradation rate. Something that's super cool that we're testing out with Virtual Peaker right now is the ability to automatically compensate for that degradation that naturally occurs. And we're doing that by Virtual Peaker is predicting exactly how much dispatch we've had over the last however many events, and then using that to throttle down the output. So we're not asking just a flat 5 kilowatts per battery. It's more of an intelligent command saying, I want 2 hours of dispatch. What's the max you can give me to hit that 2 hour window? And so that might be 4.8 kilowatts rather than 5. And that is a financial gain for us, because if the coincident peak happens in the second hour, we're not clipping off that corner of the square wave, so to speak. Moving on to the next slide and kind of switching gears here. This is an example of dispatch of Tesla Powerwalls on a remote section of our grid. If you've ever been to Colorado or our territory, this is up the Frying Pan River. So pretty far out there. We run a bit higher voltage than we do within town or city limits. We run that higher voltage just for stability reasons. And so on this, if you zoom in really closely, you can see we're not quite getting the full 25 kilowatt dispatch that we called for. It's more like 24.8. So, and the reason for that on the next slide is these batteries are absorbing reactive power to keep the voltage within spec. And so consequently, these batteries are helping with our grid stability out in these far-reaching areas. Pretty awesome side effect there. The next slide shows a bit more of an extreme case. Here we're asking 25, but you can see we're kind of fluctuating around that 22 kilowatt dispatch. And so I should specify, I'm looking at the blue here. That is the battery power exporting to the grid, and the red is what the billing meter essentially reads. So here we're only getting about 22 kilowatts. And then going to the next slide, you can see we're absorbing even more reactive power during that 2-hour window. And then on the next slide, going through these pretty fast, but this is what this whole voltage graph looks like within town limits. So here we're running a more normal voltage. And you can see during that 2-hour window, we're only absorbing a couple hundred VARs. And then on the next slide, switching gears to the member economics, this is really the reason for driving such good participation in our program. This is the Power Plus repayment summary. This is what will be on the end of the contract when the member signs up. So you'll see the battery. This member got 4 Tesla Powerwall 3s. There's a total capacity in that of 46 kilowatts. An enrolled capacity of 20 kilowatts. And the difference between these two numbers comes from the fact that we're discharging at 2 hours. If we discharge this system at 46 kilowatts, there's not enough kilowatt hours in those Tesla Powerwall 3s to support a full 2-hour dispatch while leaving 20% in the tank. So we're going to dispatch these at 20 kilowatts. And since we get our coincident peak savings value from the kilowatt value, that is how we credit. So this system has an installed cost of just over 50 grand. We're going to rebate $500 per enrolled kilowatt. So that 10,000 is just 500 times 20. And then we're going to on-bill finance the remainder of that installed cost, which gets you an on-bill financing value of at 0% of just over $200. And then this DF credit is what we pay the member for being able to use their battery on a monthly basis. That's valued at $10.30. Take all of that, you get a monthly net cost of just $15 for 10 years for 4 Tesla Powerwall 3s. That's $1,800 out of pocket for 10 years. And I know I went over a lot there. It is very complicated. There's a lot of math behind the scenes. So happy to dive into that anymore if needed. But bottom line, $1,800 out of pocket for 10 years for 4 Tesla Powerwall 3s. That's a pretty good deal, even if the utility does get to use them. Moving on to the last slide, I want to talk about the future, what we're planning here at Holy Cross with our battery virtual power plant. We're always going to continue to add OEMs as it makes sense. Sometimes it is as easy as an OEM reaching out to us and saying, hey, we're integrated with Virtual Peaker. Can we be part of your program? And then I might say things like, can you go over 3,000 feet of elevation? What's your warranty? Things like that. And, if it checks out, we're integrated and we add them to the program. Easy as that. I might reach out to our local installers and let them know. And then we're off to the races there. I want to expand into the commercial sector. There's a few challenges there. One thing we're doing is getting a battery on our own Holy Cross campus. It's about It's going to be about 1.5 megawatts and about 3 megawatt hours. And we're hoping to use that to get some lessons learned with the commercial side of things when it comes to dispatching on a regular basis. And then we want to pursue other virtual power plant use cases. I'm sure many of you in the utility world know of a feeder or two on your system that may be constrained in terms of DER capacity, but our battery power plant, virtual power plant has the potential to open that up. And then lastly, I think it would be cool to have a battery recycling program, maybe set up some sort of hub where members can take their old batteries after they've been in the program for 10 years and um, yeah, put those to new use somewhere else. So with that, I think I'll pass it to questions.
Yes.
And it looks
Yeah.
like we have quite a bit.
Yeah, we do. We do. So we're going to walk through those, and thanks both Ben and Kimbrel. I think your program that you're working with there in Colorado is generating a ton of interest. As I mentioned in some of the run up to today's call, I was at a conference in Minnesota yesterday, and people were talking about Holy Cross and their battery and VPP program. So it's getting a lot of attention in the industry, which is great. We need more of these success stories. We're going to walk through the audience questions first, and I think on these first couple. Ben, I'm going to ask you for these first two. So the first question is, what constitutes a DER? Does this include rooftop solar and battery energy storage? I think the answer is yes, but maybe what else would you include when you use the term DERs?
Yeah, it would include pretty much any smart device that you can control behind the meter. So that definitely includes battery storage, rooftop solar. They tend to be connected. Also includes thermostats, water heaters, EVs, potentially inverters, and then any other like large devices that come behind the meter down the road. We could see maybe generators being part of that. I don't think anything small like an appliance we wouldn't necessarily consider a DER and wouldn't have much interest in controlling it. It's definitely got to be large enough to get some sort of meaningful load from.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think as smart homes become more the exception than I'm sorry, the rule than the exception, there may be new possibilities on the other side of the meter with a lot of that smart home stuff, which is pretty cool. Um, Second question, and again, Ben, I'm going to ask this of you. Does virtual peaker work with utilities on customer marketing? I know we've talked about this. Can you maybe expand and maybe add a little color on that?
Yeah, so we are the software provider to enable the virtual power plant and provide all the tools to enroll the devices, control the devices, reporting, and all the other features that come with that. That also includes like some messaging tools, um, our enrollment portal that helps make enrollment really easy. And all of those are customer-facing tools that are going to be able to however the utility wants to brand the program. Though traditionally we haven't developed marketing for the utilities. We focus on being the software provider and try to provide the best types of software for each utility, and then have the utilities marketing department kind of craft that marketing however they want to message to their customers. Also, in some cases, especially for thermostats and batteries, the manufacturers will also do some marketing as well to help drive enrollments. So we can help coordinate that marketing, edit, format the marketing to however the utility wants, and kind of do that co-branding with the OEMs.
Yeah, and I think most utilities, along the lines of answering this question, I think most utilities want to be seen by their customers as their, trusted energy advisor. I think we've heard that term a lot, but I think this is a case where utilities can really take on that role for sure.
Yeah,
Connor,
just to bring in a different example, we recently launched with City Utilities in Missouri earlier this year, and they did a huge utility marketing push to drive enrollments, and they're already have about 1 megawatt of load with thermostats, and that was mostly because of the marketing they did specifically to their customers.
yeah, good. That's a good example, and I think we're seeing these types of programs get more traction as customers become less just static ratepayers and more engaged in participants in their own energy, which is a good thing for all of us. Um, all right, next question. I'm going to ask both of you this, and you all can decide how you want to answer this. Are there, and actually, Kimbrel touched on some of this. Are there any published sources of information that document virtual power plant monetary value to the customer? So, Kimbrel got into some of the cost dynamics, but here I think we're looking more specifically at what is that monetary value to the utility customer. In other words, I would look at that question and think, okay, here's John and Mary, utility customer, and they don't have virtual power plant on day zero, but then on day one they do. What does that change look like in terms of that impact to the customer financially?
Happy to start. Yeah. What we like to say is that it's a cost of resilience. So ultimately, these batteries aren't going to save you money, right? You're still paying, even if it's as low as $15 a month, there's still a premium. And that is a cost of resilience. So
Okay.
these batteries aren't really going to save you any money, at least in our service territory. Our time of use rate is entirely optional, and matter of fact, it's not compatible with Power Plus because then we'd be paying double essentially. We'd be paying the peak shaving value as well as the energy arbitrage value. So the value to the customer is a resilience.
Okay. But you're getting good customer traction, so I think people get it. Not only the resilience piece, but also I think wanting to be part of the energy solution that I think we're all confronting today. So, all right, next from our audience, this is great. This is a two-part question. So the first part, and we'll break it up into those two parts. What difference does the change in public policy associated with the Trump administration make for virtual power plants? So how do some of the changes in the current administration, how's that going to impact what you all are doing at Holy Cross? And actually, Kimberly, you touched on that a little bit. And Ben, maybe you can speak a little more broadly to what you're seeing in the industry. So Kimberly, what are you seeing this impact
Yeah,
there in Holy Cross?
that was the biggest reason we ended Power Plus and migrated to Power Plus Flex. Power Plus relied pretty heavily on government funding for the 0% on-bill financing. And then basically our board of directors determined it was too risky to continue that 0% financing through government funding. It was the RESP program. I think it's called Rural Energy Savings Program. Um, that that was 0% capital the Holy Cross could take advantage of for passing on 0% financing on batteries.
Okay. And Kimber, I'm sorry, Ben, what are you seeing more broadly in the industry?
So broadly, it really depends on the utility and where they're located and how much of these programs are dependent on federal dollars. If it's a program that's not dependent at all, it's going to have relatively low impact. Or if the utility that's already kind of planned out VPPs within their long-term planning, relatively low impact. But I kind of echo what Kimbrel said there. I think it's going to have this long tail effect where there'll be less solar installed, so then less batteries, less people enroll in programs. And there might be certain areas of the country that has larger impact on the utility and the programs that they're able to offer.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think federal assistance is an accelerator, and when it's not there, I think it, it will slow down the uptake. I mean, that's just the economics of it. But I still think some of the successes we're seeing here today are good examples of the value therein. Part two of that same question, what are the private market strategies required to address this change in national public policy? So are you seeing anything in the marketplace, and I'll open this up to both of you, where people are saying, okay, this is the new landscape and this is how we're going to navigate it, i.e. without the federal incentives?
Well, I don't have a great answer to that question, but in Holy Cross's case, we just made it so that our program does not rely on federal dollars at all. It's all our own peak shaving value and upfront rebates that come from our our We Care program, which is a 2% rider to everyone's bill. So kind of in-housed it all.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, man, it really varies based on the device that we're talking about, like thermostats or even water heaters. Like those manufacturers are really pushing the Wi-Fi connected devices now, versus buying kind of the older device models. And that's just their strategies that they're pushing that are independent of any policy. So we'll see more and more of those come into market and be connected to Wi-Fi, be eligible for these programs. I think where these policies might have a bigger impact is like batteries or EVs, how much tax credit people get when they buy them. And I don't know on the EV side, but I think on the battery side, the manufacturers are getting more creative on how financing is going to work, partnering with utilities on direct install programs to make it cheaper for the actual customer to get a battery in a home.
Okay. Kimber, on that We Care program you mentioned, is that an opt-in, opt-out, or is that just automatically part of each customer's bill?
Everyone, no
Okay.
opt-out.
Okay. Okay. All right. Next, we have a question from Indiana. In Indiana, we have a definite problem with many of the small residential serving vendors simply going out of business due to negative public policies at both the federal and state level. I think this is probably solar installers, that sort of thing is what we're looking at here, I think. Are the larger national and regional companies involved with virtual power plants going to fill this developing void in the marketplace? So I think we've talked about this, and some of those companies are more mom and pop, or even some of the device companies as well, I think is also part of this mix. So some of the smaller ones, they may not be as resilient. So are these larger companies that maybe have better funding or larger installed base, are they going to fill that void in the marketplace? How do you see that vacuum being filled?
I think in our case, it's going to be tough for those larger companies to fill the void because of where we're located. There's the huge solar installers that you might find in the Front Range rarely come over to our service territory because it's going to take about 3 hours just to get here, one way in a truck. So that adds a lot of logistical challenges. And I think that the lack of them being able to come over leaves less of a void to fill for our local mom and pop installers. Also, something that's probably unique to our territory is two of our counties have a building code that requires at least solar or on-site renewable energy generation, which basically equates to solar because wind isn't really feasible, or microhydro in our area. So we have building code that requires solar and sometimes battery storage. So that's going to keep a lot of our contractors busy.
Okay.
It's tough for the big ones to come over from the Front Range.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't necessarily speak from the installer side because we just work with the manufacturers. We don't necessarily work with the installers, though, especially on the battery front. There are so many battery manufacturers now that whether it's the very large ones or the small ones, they're going to have to start going after other markets besides the super large metro areas, to increase their market share. So I would expect probably the larger ones just because they have more resources to start expanding and focusing on some of these smaller markets.
Good. Thanks. All right. Next question. And Kimbrel, this one's for you. How many of Holy Cross meters are smart meters, and what generation are they?
All but like 10 are smart meters, and those are the few members who have opted out of smart metering. And we rolled that out in 2016, I believe. I don't know what generation of meters that is, but hopefully that tells you based on the fact that we rolled that, finished installing all the smart meters around 2016.
Okay. All right. I'm going to roll these next two questions together because I think part one of this we've already addressed, at least in part. How is the recent White House announcement to eliminate all programs for renewables going to affect Holy Cross Energy? So that's part of it, and I think we've discussed part of that. But then maybe the corollary or follow-up to that is there an investor perspective on this, on how outside capital can support virtual power plants, and I think the question is probably in the context of the broader energy transition. The person goes on to write, I'm coming from a philanthropic investor in a regulated utility context and in favor of cooperatives and municipally owned utilities in particular. We organize capital of all kinds to funnel at decarbonization and electrification. So given that the regulatory landscape, at least at the federal level, has just made a pretty big shift, are you all seeing, or is that something that you think the industry would be open to, is private investment coming in and having that business model that supports doing virtual power plants at scale?
Yeah, I think we would be interested in that. I think the industry in general would be interested in that as well. We are partnering with some banks, some local banks, for a different initiative regarding heat pumps, on-bill financing those. It's not a 0% capital, but it still can help with adoption. So continuing things like that, I think I would love to, re-roll out Power Plus with the 0% on-bill financing. It was just such a great deal. But in general, I think with the elimination of programs for renewable energies at the government level is going to have a decline in our VPP installation rate. And we are also noticing at the power supply level, when we're trying to put out RFPs and get utility scale assets, those are becoming a bit more of a challenge too.
And I'll ask this to both of you, a follow-up on this. Is there a model by which, rather than outside private capital investors funding things more on the customer side, I wonder, is there a way that they can do that more coordinated with the utility, where hey, we see business value in this. If we roll out program X at so many millions of dollars and we expect a modest return, is that something that you see where the utilities can say, that's the best option for us, given that the federal largesse is no longer in play, at least for the foreseeable future? Is there a model where you see co-ops, in this case, or municipals partnering with private investors to be able to provide some of these things? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know if there's going to be a one size fits all model. I bet it would be pretty, non-cookie cutter from utility to utility. I don't have a great answer for that for the Holy Cross case.
What do you think, Ben, and some of the utilities that you work with?
Yeah, I say more broadly, it's definitely going to vary by utility, and really the size of the utility and how much they could finance themselves through their own budgets, or they would need to reach out. I can see there definitely be value in partnering with some sort of bank or investor on direct install programs that get more batteries out there or more water heaters out there to really drive the amount of load you have to control. Both those tend to be a high upfront cost to get all those devices out there.
Right.
But if you're able to finance it over like a 10, 15-year period, you can really reduce what that'll look like.
Right. And I think models will emerge. I think it's all still learning as we go on this journey, particularly on the financial side. Okay, next question. And Kimberly, I think you touched on this already, but I think this question is about Holy Cross, but I would love to hear Ben's perspective of what he's seeing at other utilities as well. Do you actually pay per month versus performance? And I think that's how your model works with your VPP. Is it a software as a service?
So yes.
Is there a performance component element to it?
Yes and yes. We pay Power Plus Flex is a monthly performance payment, and we get that performance value essentially from Virtual Peaker. We download on a monthly basis everyone's average kilowatts that they gave us over the month, and then multiply that by a dollar value and stick it on their bill as a credit.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so more broadly, especially with batteries, we're seeing more and more utilities do performance-based incentives. That's really because the battery data is really reliable. It's very easy to measure per battery how much performance it's doing. If you look at other device types like thermostats, like that's almost always done based like per season, just like participating in a certain percentage of events or just being online for the season. Just because measuring each individual thermostat's really, really hard. And if you're a utility, you're really looking at the aggregate load shift you're able to do based on thousands of thermostats.
Okay. Similar question here. What bill credits do you give your customers that are paying $15 a month when you have that control? Do you isolate the customers, or are the batteries exporting power to the distribution system? If they export, do the customers get net metering or otherwise paid for the energy and demand exported? So I guess this is just all part of the here's the fee. What does that dynamic look like
Yeah,
in terms of things like net metering, and what's that dynamic look like?
great question. So PJ, let's go to the first slide and my supplementals. Um, So for Power Plus Flex and Power Plus, the incentives, the enrollment incentive and the ongoing incentive are basically the same. 500 kilowatts per enrolled capacity up front, and then an ongoing incentive of $10.30 per kilowatt per month. But Power Plus Flex has that performance base that I mentioned, and that those are the bill credits that the customers are getting when they're only paying $15 a month. So it's all baked in once you've got your enrollment incentive, once you've done the monthly financing charge, and once you've stacked on the ongoing incentive, that all boils down to that $15 a month payment. And we discharge the batteries onto the grid. So, but obviously some of that discharge might go into the house if the house has some load. And then from a net metering perspective, that does spin the net meter backwards. However, if take an example without solar, because it makes it a little bit more simple to look at. Without solar, the battery is essentially sitting at 100% state of charge. And we then discharge it down to 20% and through the net meter. So it spins the meter backwards, and then the battery's going to charge itself back up to 100% through the net meter. So one-to-one cancels out. And then to complicate it a little bit, if you add solar, your battery might charge from solar and then discharge due to our command, and then recharge from the grid or from solar. But at the end of the month, it all washes out because all the charging and discharging goes through the net meter. And we have no demand charges for residential. And the demand only works on if you're pulling from the grid. There's no demand assessed for exporting to the grid.
Okay. All right. I'm going to jump ahead to the next one here. And Kimbrel, again, this one I think is directed at you, but Ben can probably add some color from some of the other utilities that he works with. Can EVs participate in the Holy Cross VPP program? And I think the answer is yes, because you had some data on that, but maybe add a little more context to how they're
Yeah,
participating and how that fits into the overall program.
roughly at around the same time we launched Power Plus, we started an EV charger program. And the basics of that is essentially we give you a free charger and you enroll in a managed charging program. However, we didn't really do that managed charging because we wanted to figure out what exactly that value was, and we wanted to tiptoe into that managed charging very cautiously because unlike batteries, you have a potential to mess with someone's comfort or ability to get to the hospital or whatever if you curtail their charging at the wrong time. So yeah, we have like 600 EVs chargers in our virtual peaker platform that we're collecting data on and analyzing, but we're not really utilizing those chargers for demand response in the way that you think we might. And the reason being, we found out that on average, a charger might participate, no, a charger might only affect our coincident peak by about 1 kilowatt, as opposed to what you'd think it would affect the peak by like 8 kilowatts, because that's, typically the nameplate rating of the charger. So due to the low value a charger participates in our coincident peak, and the likelihood of messing with someone's comfort or upsetting the membership, we don't really participate our enrolled EV chargers in the virtual power plan. So it's kind of a yes and no answer.
Okay. All right. Here's one from a FERC participant on the call with us today. Do you allow the customer to charge their battery to 100% or less than that? You talked about the discharge down to 20. This person's asking, do you allow them to charge it to 100% or less than that?
Yeah. So during our control event, which the graph for that is, I don't know what, it's slide 18 actually. During those hours of roughly 11 a.m. all the way till 9 p.m. in this one example, this is the battery VPP in practice slide, PJ, if you can navigate there. During this control event, the member is essentially locked out of their battery unless a grid outage occurs, and then the battery just turns off from the grid and powers the member's house. But during this period, the battery is ours, follows our commands, but all other times of the month, the member is free to do whatever they want with it. So it can charge to 100%. They can, essentially do whatever they want with it. But most everyone is setting it and forgetting it at 100%, or they have it set to solar self-consumption, where it fluctuates somewhere in the top 60% of its state of charge, depending on how much solar is available. So hopefully that answered that question.
All right, thank you. And Kimberl, another one. And PJ, while you're on the slides, there was the slide that showed the annual degradation of the batteries.
Yeah, the next slide after this.
Go to that one. Yeah. The question is, can Kimberl explain the sources of error in the annual degradation slide? I think you can expand on that a little
so bit. Outliers here might be sources of broken systems or internet connectivity, and the reason being, if one of these batteries has had an internet outage for an extended period of time, this calculation is going to look at that battery as a degraded battery, so hence the error there. If it underperforms, it's going to kind of look like a degraded system in this calculation.
Okay. I have one more for you, Kimberl, from our audience. This is an interesting one. I think this is from the Kimberl fan club. Since you helped me build all of my electric duplex and worked with me on the grants and rebates, it was a huge help, and I maxed out the solar with the Tesla batteries. Thank you. So we have the Kimberl fan club with us today. So
awesome.
good stuff there. Yeah. This one is for both of you. And Ben, I'd like to hear your perspective on this as well, because you have all those different partnerships, and you spoke to the value of those partnerships with all the different devices. So are you all, from what you're seeing, again, Ben, and industry-wide, and Kimberl, your experience, are you open to the use of bidirectional EV capabilities like a 2026 Nissan Leaf with a 75 kW battery and a 16 kW battery bank and a 5 kW solar array capable to create a virtual power plant? So what are your thoughts on that, the bidirectional EV capabilities?
I'd say from our perspective, we're definitely open to it. We haven't seen the technology really get there yet, even though I know the EV manufacturers have done very good on the marketing side with it. Some of the EV charger manufacturers just released bidirectional charging this year. So we should be starting to test that out here towards the end of the year to see how well that's going to work. But certainly from a software perspective and from a management perspective, we're very open to it. And it's more about, do the EVs actually work as they say they do?
Yeah, I would add to that in just saying, I think that there's a ton of potential for vehicle to load or vehicle to grid, just because everyone owns a car and soon most everyone's going to have an electric vehicle. And combined with the fact that most likely, I think that most of those vehicles are going to have that bidirectional capability. So extrapolating that, most likely everyone's going to have a bidirectional capable vehicle in 5 to 10 years. Whereas comparing that to stationary energy storage, there's a high upfront cost there just for the stationary energy storage aspect. So all that is to say that if we can correctly capture the potential there in the bidirectional vehicle that many of our members will have, there's a lot of potential for the virtual power plant and discharging those onto the grid or discharging those onto the home. In practice, so far, I'd echo what Ben says, the technology doesn't seem to be quite there. One thing we've been doing is piloting with one of our school districts a bus to grid program. And that's been years in the making, and still we have yet to have a successful dispatch. There's been challenges with the equipment, companies going out of business, other companies buying other companies, all with like a Bluebird bus and a certain charger that so yeah, it's been challenging. And then on the residential side, we're starting to see Cybertrucks in our territory and the GM's or the Chevy electric truck, which have like 200 kilowatt hours of energy storage in them. So obviously a ton of potential, but again, it gets into that tricky area of how do you dip into people's comfort and electric driving range
Right.
without upsetting too much.
That's what I was going to ask about. I think because there's a very, I think, pragmatic issue there around we're used to having our cars, and if we want to go somewhere, when we want to go, where we want to go, we do it. Um, that's going to be interesting to see what the whole program design will ultimately look like in terms of how people can opt in and opt out, and
I
make
think
sure
it's
that
going to have to incorporate some sort of opt-in, opt-out architecture. Um, but even you might miss that text message, that comes in to opt out. You might miss it. You might be out of service, and then you get back into service, and then it's too late by then.
right, right.
It's just
That's
tricky, but
tricky.
we're open to it. We
Yeah,
realize the potential there. That's for
yeah.
sure.
In keeping with the pragmatic theme of the last topic, this is an interesting one because this gets into one of those enabling technologies that we really haven't talked a lot about. What is the experience with using Wi-Fi? Essentially, the customer manages the Wi-Fi. So does that cause issues? In other words, this is great as long as you have connectivity, but there may be some variables or wildcards like Wi-Fi in the connectivity. Have you had any experiences? And again, Ben, from the many utilities that you work with, or Kimbrel there specifically at Holy Cross.
Yeah. So pretty much every battery in our VPP relies on the Wi-Fi connection. Some of the newer OEMs have more triple um, redundancy, and they're able to incorporate cellular. Um, but yeah, we do see batteries clicking off of the Wi-Fi, and that could just be a member innocently changing their Wi-Fi provider or even their Wi-Fi password, and that boots them off. So
Mm,
we always encourage people to hardwire their internet communications. But yeah, sometimes Wi-Fi does get in the way of our uh, dispatching, which makes it tricky from a how reliable is this virtual power plant going to be to us? On the flip side of that, I actually see very surprisingly little impact from loss of Wi-Fi connections. For example, we've got about 230 sites at the moment, and only 3 of them are offline. And I see that number fluctuate between like 3 and 5, and they oftentimes get themselves back online. So it actually isn't as much of an issue as you might think, for us at least.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say more broadly, it's definitely an issue that utilities have to manage with any type of VPP program. Um, in particular, like with large thermostat programs, you're just always going to have some thermostats that are offline. And we just try to provide visibility into it, like knowing which devices are offline, how long they've been offline, having some messaging that you can automatically send out to get those people reconnected. But it does require probably more constant management, especially if your program's really large compared to what you would think from a traditional power plant where you just turn it on and you're going to get that amount of power you expect.
Question for Kimbrel. Are the batteries installed on the residential customer, I think customer site? Does the customer have to have solar? I think the answer to that is no, but can you talk a little bit about the residential customer and the batteries and solars and how that all runs together?
Yeah, they're installed. They're installed on the member's home, most commonly inside the garage. We don't allow anyone to put them outside. We have really cold service territory. So I've seen in our first installation actually on the Holy Cross campus, 2 Tesla Powerwalls, we installed them outside, and in a cold winter day, they spend the first hour of dispatch warming themselves up. So it's certainly better to have them inside in our territory. And no, you do not have to have solar. There's about 5 Power Plus participants without solar.
Okay. All right. This is an interesting one. By the way, thanks to our audience for these questions. I think we're breaking records here with the volume of questions coming in from you all. So we really appreciate that. So here's someone who wrote, I've participated in the Peak Core program at his or her utility for 30 years. I think that's a load management program similar to what we have here, where I'm based in Northern California with SMUD, and we participate as well. For the past 15 years, I've received no payment or credit because the utility changed it to be used only if needed when they would use it. Could this be the fate of virtual power plants and other similar programs as the other programs become more efficient and effective? I think that's a pretty legitimate question in terms of the business model and how that impacts. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that directionally correct, or is it a different beast altogether?
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely a possibility, but with Holy Cross, that's one of the reasons um, we shortened the program term from 10 years to 5 years. As we continue to march forward in our energy transition, there's more and more uncertainty going forward. However, I do know that we do everything in our power to not sweep the rug out from under our members. If you're going to go on that financial investment to join Power Plus, that's big, and we definitely take that to heart, and we're going to do everything we can to keep our bill credits consistent for the program duration, because there's a lot riding on that for the member.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, as technology evolves, there's definitely a risk as existing programs come obsolete. Like those old load control switches programs are obsolete at this point. Most of those switches probably don't even work based on utility, what switches they were using. So there's certainly that risk, and that's why it's important to keep working with the technology that's going to evolve, having access to as much different manufacturers as possible, so you're not baking all on like one manufacturer to be successful or all like one device type to be successful. Just as an example, because we talked about V2G, like it's quite possible 10 years from now when a lot more people have EVs, V2G is way more prevalent. Like residential batteries might not have as much market share since everyone will have a battery in their car.
Just to elaborate a little
how it
bit,
all plays out. I'm sorry, go ahead, Kimbrel.
just to elaborate a little bit on what could change the value of the VPP for the Holy Cross and the member is technically, I mentioned our financial mechanism comes from peak shaving, and we pass that value to the member. Well, what if our wholesale power agreements change? I'm not saying that because it will. I don't expect it to, and that's why we're comfortable entering these 10-year agreements. But theoretically, things like that could happen, in which case there wouldn't be the value to pass on anymore, something like that.
Right, right. And it is a pretty fluid environment right now. All right, these next two, I think, Ben, are primarily for you. Has virtual peaker worked in Texas or California where FERC 2222 allows for aggregators? Has that come up at all?
Yeah, we work with, actually, I guess we work across the board with different utilities in both states. Aggregators definitely play in both those states, and in some cases we partner with them. In other cases, they're an indirect competitor because they're competing with the utility, and utilities are our clients. So
Mm-hmm.
there's some variance there. I'll say for us, our big focus has been working with cooperatives and municipalities, um, which usually aren't as impacted by these aggregators. And like I know in Texas, the aggregators are focused on basically providing load to IOUs, and they're not focused or they're not stopping cooperative programs going on. Just use an example like Renew Homes, since they merged with the Ohm Connect, they play a role as an aggregator in Texas, but then at the same time, for cooperative utility programs, they're a partner in that program that utilities use to control the Nest devices. So it's a little bit more complex on how it works, and kind of where the aggregators play versus we and our utilities partners play.
Okay. Yeah, it's sounds like a little bit of co-opetition going on there.
Yeah, for
We
sure.
see a lot. We see a lot of that in different markets with what's going on today. Another one for you, Ben. You touched on this when you were talking about your partner network, but maybe expand on this a little bit. Are there other batteries in addition to power walls involved in existing VPP programs? I think the answer is yes, but maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. The answer is definitely yes. We currently integrate with 10 battery manufacturers that would all be eligible for VPP programs. And it's just really goes utility by utility about which of the manufacturers they want to enable in the programs. Some manufacturers charge to control those devices. I'd say some of the newer, smaller battery manufacturers aren't charging, so they're trying to drive more market share. So we're trying to give the utility as much options as possible and as many manufacturers as possible in these programs.
Great, great. Kimbrel, back to you. This is another topic that I think you touched on. Maybe you can add a little color around this. How do you know what time to command the batteries to discharge? Is there an algorithm or software, or is it a specific time of day? So maybe add a little more to that one.
Yeah, we are using an algorithm, and that algorithm basically has an API connection to the seven, I think, different weather forecasts for the Denver metro area, because that is when our wholesale power provider's system has a peak, and when their system peaks, they charge us a lot of money. So that's the algorithm. It's typically between it's typically a 2 hour window between the 4 to 9 p.m. range, and that 4 to 9 p.m. is pretty standard as a residential peaking time frame. A little bit more on that, we actually just we're testing out right now virtual peakers algorithm to do this as well. By so traditionally we've actually just got a very complicated Excel spreadsheet that does all the algorithm and crunching numbers for us, and it spits out a time frame. But we're going to try and use virtual peakers for the first time in the next few months.
Well, good. Like the old saying goes, when Excel goes down, the grid goes down. But I think we're slowly moving away from that as an industry. Another one from our audience. This is great. There's so many. I'm going to try to get to all of them. This is one I think for both of you. So there was a mention of adding generators to VPP programs. How would this work, especially with generators when they are not renewable energy? Are there any technical issues? I guess this a follow question. Are there any technical issues associated with coordinating batteries and generators? And I guess Ben, maybe broadly what you see from an industry perspective, and then maybe Kimbrel can share his experience at Holy Cross.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of our cooperative clients ask for generator control. It's been something that's kind of been at the back of our minds, though I think the technical issues are very valid about how it actually work, how would customers be compensated. It's also not a renewable energy source, so would the utility also pay for like fuel for those customers? There's definitely layers of complexity to it. On top of that, we haven't seen the major generator manufacturers be supportive of generator control, so it's possible like that never actually comes to market as a viable option. Yeah, there's a lot of things to consider. I think from the coordination between batteries and generators, from our perspective on the software side, they would be treated independently. And then it's more so on the utility side of how they operate them. If they operate them independently, operate them together, um, that could definitely vary utility by utility.
Kimbrel, how about what you're seeing there in Holy Cross?
Yeah, I don't think we'd ever add generators to our virtual power plant just because our virtual power plant's targeted at our 100% renewable energy goal. So most feel would be counterproductive.
Okay. All right, another one from the audience. Boy, there's, believe it or not, with 28 questions from the audience. We're working through these. This is great. Okay, if the source of the electricity is produced is renewable from, say, PV, the primary energy demand is reduced and the CO2 benefit has been realized. Can this be monetized as a carbon offset? Is that something either of you are experienced with, or what you're seeing?
I don't think I'd be able to give a good answer to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer to that either. I know there's been some clients that have explored the idea of doing control based on current signals versus a price signal, though I don't know if anyone's actually doing that in practice right now.
Okay. Ben, this is one for you. And I know we're getting close to wrapping up here, so I'm keeping an eye on the clock as we work through these. You've already said the question is, are VPPs operational in California? And the answer is yes. You actually have some customers in California. Do you want to say a little bit more about some of the work you all are doing in California?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, our clients, we work with both PG&E and SoCal Edison. They're running a couple large water heater VPP programs. Also work with San Diego Community Power, and they're doing multi-device programs, currently focused on thermostats and batteries. And then there's other VPP programs throughout California, both at the large IOUs as well as the municipal level. I'd say most of them are thermostat and battery focused right now. But yeah, definitely operational in California. It just depends if you're talking about an IOU or like a municipal or CCA of how they're actually working.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask I get to actually ask a couple of questions here as we wrap up. These are kind of some of the bigger picture types of questions. If you were advising a utility director or a CEO, or maybe if you were the utility director or the CEO of the utility, and you were looking at virtual power plants, what is, from each of your individual perspectives, what is that one thing that you would want to make sure your utility was doing to have a successful, scalable virtual power plant program? And I think the emphasis here being scalable. What does that look like in terms of being able to scale when you're in that decision-making seat? What's that one thing? Maybe it's two things, but what is that thing that you think would drive success at scale for virtual power plants? And Kimberly, let's go with you first and what your
I think
experience there.
I'd have to say a well-defined and high-value use case. Ours being that coincident peak that gives us tons of value that we can push on to the member. Because, yeah, I say high value and well-defined use case because that kind of trickles down into a high value incentive structure, and that trickles down to helping out with adoption, which means scale.
Right.
And that also can give you what kind of DERs you want to use. Is it thermostats or EVs or batteries?
Yeah, defining the use case. Good. And Ben, how about you? What's that one thing you would do when you're sitting in that CEO's office and you really want to drive growth in your VPP?
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to reiterate what Kimbrel said, but I think Holy Cross is a good example of defining a really good goal and use case and how VPPs are going to fit into that goal with helping fill that last 10% gap they need to go 100% renewable. So just having that goal well defined and then having a centralized team that's focused on achieving that goal. I think less so like at our cooperative clients, more so at the bigger utilities. It's a lot of siloed business units that are only focused on thermostats or only focused on EVs or batteries. Being able to combine all those teams together under that centralized goal can help drive more load shifts, more use cases, and more enrollment.
Yeah, the organizational side of things always matters, and sometimes that's overlooked. So that's a great one to include here. One more, as I'm again keeping an eye on the clock here. What's the potential industry-wide for virtual power plants? And I'm going to look at this from the perspective of being an industry analyst, and we're looking at the energy transition trends, and some things are accelerating, some things are slowing. But when you look at that, let's say there's a pie chart of that energy mix, right? You know, nuclear is going to be a piece, natural gases for the foreseeable future, and all the rest. How do you see virtual power plants fitting into that? And Kimbrel, again, I'll start with you, and then with your experience there at Holy Cross, and then Ben, maybe
Yeah.
a broader industry perspective.
Yeah, so given our goal of 100% by 2030 and our, maximum system-wide peak being around the 230 megawatt range, we foresee our battery program expanding until we get to around 10 megawatts. So we're roughly at 5 right now, so that gives us a bit more expansion. Hopefully we'll get there quicker than how we've gotten to where we currently are via commercial systems being a lot larger per installation. But so roughly for us, it's about 10 megawatts or roughly 10% of our 100% renewable energy goal. And that's not so much generation because batteries don't generate power, but it's the load flattening that I would say allows for more renewable generation.
Right,
Soak it up when it's sunny, discharge it when it's not.
right, right. And that's one of those kind of the way I look at it is, 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in the energy transition, right? Let's
Mm-hmm.
put up a lot of solar panels. Wow, we had 0 3 years ago. Now we have 1,000. That kind of thing. So I think that's going to be more important as we move deeper into the energy transition. Ben, how about you? What do you think the potential is? Again, when you look at that overall energy mix.
Yeah, I have a similar answer though, I guess a little bit different kind of perspective on it. So I would say VPPs could fill about 10% of the gap there. So the DOE did a report back in 2023 that really talked about deep dive VPPs, and that VPPs need to make up about 10 to 20% of peak demand by 2030 to meet some of the gaps we have. This throughout the country, not any specific territory. I lean more conservative there and say more so 10%, just because there's a lot of factors that are going to go into the growth of VPPs. More people need to adopt smart devices, in particular EVs and batteries. That's where you're going to get the biggest amount of load shift in there. And then utility programs really need to grow and scale. In particular, less focus on pilots and really scaling programs to get more enrollments. And I think really the big thing from a software perspective is making VPPs more reliable so that they can actually be used in the control room, that the operators actually have a certain level of confidence when they press the button, they're going to get that amount of load from the VPP they expect.
Right. I think that'll come as the VPP space matures, right? You look back to the cynicism around maybe smart meters or smart thermostats 15, 20 years ago, and look how that's changed. So I think that's all part of the evolution. We're just about out of time. So again, I want to thank our speakers, Kimbrel and Ben. Thanks so much. Thanks to Virtual Peaker for your support today. Thanks to our audience, man. This has been great. This is probably the most engaged audience we've had if we're measuring it by the number of questions coming in. So we really appreciate that as well. And I'm going to hand it back over to PJ, who's going to wrap us up.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Kimbrel. Thanks, Ben. Fantastic conversation. Again, we want to thank Virtual Peaker for making today's event possible. And for our audience, look for an email from us containing a link to the replay. probably in a few days, maybe next week. And please take just a moment to complete our survey at the end of the session. Your feedback is greatly appreciated, and we'll use it for future sessions. From everyone here at Energy Central, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on a future power session. Thank you. This concludes today's presentation.